Oh man, I woke up this morning to the New York Times story on Facebook. You guys, I don't know if you saw that. I don't know why it upsets me so much, but it really does. And it kind of feels like we should really spend this hour talking about ethics in product. It's what we ought to do, but that's not what I'm planning to talk about, but it is a really important subject. I do feel like we all need to talk more about that. Yeah, if you haven't read the story, you'll probably want to. I don't want to believe it, but probably pretty true. What I did want to talk about is, well, what I really would love to talk about is my favorite topic, discovery. This is actually what I talk about most of the time. Some of you in this room actually have heard me speak for 1 or 2 days exclusively on this topic. Discovery is really what product people do, right? Product people, it's not about all this. There's a lot of silliness in our industry. People spend all this time worrying about prioritization techniques and roadmaps and business cases and all this BS. And really what it's about is solving hard problems with a lot of constraints. That's what product people do. I call that discovery. Things like lean startup techniques fit in that. We've got many, many techniques that contribute to that. Design thinking techniques, customer development techniques. The way I like to frame the work is we always have these risks around value risks. Would people buy this product? Usability risks. Could they figure out how to use the product? Feasibility risk, can we actually build the product? And viability risk, does it actually work for the different parts of our business? Sales, marketing, finance, legal, biz dev. And we have quantitative techniques to do that, qualitative techniques. You can kind of see why this is such a great topic. This is really what I love to do. But I also have to say that at this point, I kind of can't keep denying something, which is that I have met so many teams where it's not really that hard to teach them how to do good discovery. But then I find out, sometimes months later, sometimes years, but I find out that they're not actually able to work that way, which kills me. It really is, it kills me. And I decided, well, I've been seeing this for a long time. I've been sort of watching this brew, and I decided each year I kind of try to decide what I'm going to focus on is the most important thing, and I decided that as much as I love this topic, this is not what I'm going to focus on for the next at least year. Probably will keep me busy for several years. And I want to tackle what that is here. When I say teams aren't able to really work the way they need to, mostly we talk about, well, they just don't get it. They're not a product culture company. They're not product mindset. You've probably all heard the terms. I know I've used it lots of times. We'll sort of pick some other phrase like, oh, they're still IT mindset or IT culture or project culture or command and control culture. It's got all these different names. But what I want to drill in is what really is going on. And the way I like to describe that, let's start by, there's really two kinds of teams, I would argue, two kinds of tech companies in the world. In most companies, and I want to be honest, this is true all over the world. That's what I've found, all over the world. It is true right in the heart of San Francisco. You can have great companies, and then you can have the rest. Unfortunately, it drives me nuts, but I think the vast majority of companies think like this. They think the purpose of their tech teams, I'll use that term loosely for now, squads, product teams, whatever. The purpose of those tech teams is to serve the business. And they'll usually use that phrase, very often use that phrase. Some of them are sophisticated enough to not say it blatantly like that, but that's what's going on. And on the other hand, in great companies, it's very different. And I want to emphasize this is not just a small semantic difference. This is a fundamental difference. In strong product companies, the teams are actually empowered to serve customers, not serve the business, serve customers in ways that our customers genuinely love, yet work for the business. Now, to me, I hope you don't see that as a minor difference. That is a major difference. One of the most famous VCs in Silicon Valley, John Doerr, he likes to say, we need teams of missionaries, not teams of mercenaries. Right? That's one of my favorite points. And that's basically a summary, a little pithy summary of this. The first is the mercenary model. The second is the missionary model. IT mindset, product mindset. I used to frame this more around culture, but as you'll see, I'm realizing culture is too vague. It really is. Culture is such, I still believe culture is very important, but it's so vague. It's not actionable to most people. So I want to say more about what that means. So I'm going to talk, so to me, the heart of what we're really going to get to is this idea of a truly empowered team. And I don't mean that as a buzzword. I mean literally. It's literally, I think, the accurate word. I don't know a more accurate word. But we need to talk about what that really means. Now, I know for a fact that there are several companies in this room that are already in this model. And my goal would be for you to hold on to that. Because in many organizations, once you get into growth stage, you lose that. And you move from the empowered team model back to the old way. But I also know for a fact that many of the companies in the room, and it's probably true that most in the room, are not in the empowered team model. Now, I'm going to give you a litmus test at the end so that you can decide for yourself if you think your company is really working this way or not. Now, I want to start by pointing out that I am not even close to the first person to say this is a good way to work. This is old news. We have known for so long of the virtues of truly empowered teams. This is actually just my top 10 favorite books that make this case. There's many more. The first one, if you only read one, I would suggest Simon Sinek's new book, Leaders Eat Last. But there are so many good books, and they all make the argument that the old command and control way of working doesn't work for innovation. It just doesn't do what we need to do. And in fact, I would encourage you to read all of these books. They all are strong and inspiring books. But I also have to admit, they haven't done much. They have not managed to convince the CEOs at most tech companies or tech-powered companies that they should actually work this way. So I have seen this now for, honestly, many years, but I really decided to drill in on this. A lot of my introductions to companies will come from the venture capital community, and I'll go and spend a little time. I always learn you can tell right away how things really work just by talking to some of the teams, especially the engineers. And you can figure out pretty quick whether they're in that missionary or mercenary model. Honestly, you can tell in minutes which model they're in. But a lot of times I'll make sure I know what the capabilities of the teams are, and then I'll go sit down with that CEO and I'll say, look, we know what the issue is. You know what the issue is. You're trying to do command and control. It worked fine maybe when you were just a 10-person startup, but now you got 200 people. And they're all mercenaries, and you're getting no innovation, and things are way too slow. And it's like, you know that, right? And then, so then the big question becomes why? And I will tell you that most of the time, I get this word out of them. They don't trust the team. Now, it's not like they go and yell that out. You got to pry it out of them, but they don't trust the team. Now, we can get back to whether or not they should trust the team. Well, that's a big topic, because a lot of times the teams, it's true, are not necessarily trustworthy. Now, we need to talk about what that means. But the real issue is for whatever reason, they don't trust the team. So what do? They feel like the leaders have to kind of get together and decide what needs to be done, and they sort of revert to command and control. Very predictable. I see this happen in so many companies. Even companies that were previously good, when they grow, they often lose that good. They moved from the empowered team model back into command and control. So I like to point out to the leaders when they point out to me that very often the people aren't trustworthy. And I'm going to be very frank with you in this talk. I mean, I only have an hour with you, and I can't sugarcoat this stuff. Most of the time, they zero right in on the product managers. The product managers are usually the weak link. Reality, that's just true. Ben Horowitz, many of you know Ben. By the way, Ben would be a wonderful speaker at these. Ben is one of my favorite thinkers in pretty much anything, but especially product. And he likes to argue that the single most important non-C-level position at a company is the director of product management. And his argument is, look, product teams are only as good as their product managers. Who do we hold accountable for the strength of the product managers, the competence of the product managers? That's their managers, the directors and VP of product. And his argument, if that person is not doing their job, it all falls apart. And you end up back in that command and control mercenary model. So I point out to them, though, if they don't trust their teams, whose fault is that? Who is it that hired these people? So we need to get back to the real root of the issue here. So what I wanted to really talk about is what does it really take to have the truly empowered team model? I wanted to start by, there's 3 companies that you all recognize. Of course, what do they have in common? They're 3 of the top most valuable companies in the world. Apple has been going back and forth with the $1 trillion valuation. But that's 3 pretty successful companies. I would argue that those 3 have earned the right to be up here because they have proven their ability to consistently innovate on behalf of their customers multiple times. And that is, so that's interesting. Actually, this is a good way for me to explain why I don't think culture captures this point enough. Because many of you, probably like me, have at least been inside all 3 of these companies at some point. And you've probably seen that they are all completely different cultures. In fact, these are pretty much 3 polar opposite cultures. Google is, more like a party. And Amazon is definitely not. Those are very, very big, and Apple's kind of in the middle. But yeah, they all 3 are pretty awesome at product, I would argue. All 3. So culture doesn't capture it. I think there's something more interesting. There is one point I really wanted to highlight to you that I think gets to something that's much more meaningful in terms of what's in common. And I'm actually surprised at how many people, even in Silicon Valley, don't know what I'm about to say, haven't known this before. And that is that, so during the formative decade of all 3 of these companies, the 4 co-founders, right, Bezos, Jobs, and Larry and Sergey at Google, the 4 co-founders were all actually coached by the same person. Right? You guys, hopefully many of you have known that. If you don't feel bad because he didn't like, in fact, about a decade ago, so he's known as the coach, he was known as the coach of Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago. But about a decade ago, I wanted to write an article about him, and I did. And I asked him to review it, and he said, look, I don't want any attention on me. It should be all the companies I work with, the people I coach. He literally coached those 4 co-founders through the formative decade of their companies, and in many cases beyond. He actually coached a lot more people. In fact, many people I really respect. I wish I could say that he coached me. I had met him several times, but I never was coached by him. But I am happy to say that I was actually I was managed by people that were directly coached by him. So I feel like I benefited from him. And many of the people I really respect were coached directly by him. Ben Horowitz actually was coached directly by him. And so this guy, in fact, one of my favorite quotes from him, and I actually have a lot, this quote. One of the reasons I love it so much is that I would argue that this is actually what's in common between Google, Amazon, and Apple, right here. They each had their own unique way. They still have their own unique way of doing this. But fundamentally, what they're doing is that they're providing an environment for their ordinary people to do extraordinary things, which is really that's what we need. So to me, that's what's more important. Yeah, certainly this is a part of culture, but it's more specific. And what I wanted to really talk about, and it's not like just Bill Campbell's teachings, but I do believe that he had an amazing legacy. And that legacy are these incredibly successful companies that have gone on to do great things. All right, so let's start. He mentions leadership, which is really where I want to start. Because if you want to really embrace the model of truly empowered teams and work like the best product companies, which I argue if you are in a business where you're competing with the likes of Google and Amazon, then you better be good at this stuff. Otherwise, I genuinely believe you have no chance. It's only a matter of time. So if you believe that you need to do this, we need to talk about what's really involved. And I'll warn you, this is not easy. In fact, I feel even guilty. I'm about to throw a lot at you. But I would argue as the heads of product, you're the ones that will either cause this to happen or not happen. So we need to start here with the role of the leaders. Some of you may know Mike Fisher. Actually, it was a long time. I met him first. Hop probably knows him. He was running engineering at PayPal when his partner, they started a firm called AKF. Marty Abbott was running technology at eBay. So I first met them a long time ago, about 20 years ago. That's actually Mike Fisher on the page there. Mike is currently the CTO of Etsy, for those who know, another really good company. But more interesting, Mike and Marty are two of what I consider the best leaders in our industry. And I don't think it's an accident the two of them actually went to West Point together, and they both served in special forces. Now, I say that because in special forces, really around the world, this whole topic we're talking about is not really a luxury. It's life or death, literally. So they really live leadership. And I have, in fact, I've written about things I've learned from Marty and Mike for years, just because I think they really have studied leadership. One of the points I want to emphasize here is that we usually lump together leadership and management. I'm separating them here because there are two distinct sets of responsibilities. Even though it's true that most leaders are also managers, most managers are not necessarily leaders, but I want to call out the two responsibilities. For most of you, you probably need to be good at both sets of things I'm going to talk about here. Typical head of product is a leader and a manager. Okay, so, and I love this quote for there, leadership is about inspiring to great accomplishment, and management is about helping get the team there. So let's talk about leadership. Now, this is a massive topic. We could talk all day just about leadership, but I want to make sure we're on the same page. I would argue, and I do argue all the time, because mostly what I do is coach heads of product, that there are 5 big responsibilities for heads of product. 5 big responsibilities. And largely you would do this with your head of technology and head of design as well. But and in many companies, the CEO would be in that. That would be kind of the group that would be responsible for these. But at minimum, this is on the head of product. The first is the vision. And the product vision is so critical. This is, if you've got 20 product teams in your company, the product vision is the primary context that shows the common purpose for all 20 teams. I continue to meet companies that don't have that vision. They often do for their first few years with the founder had it, but then now they're 5 years old and they've kind of been there, done that, and now the teams, they've got 20, 30, 40 teams, and they're all kind of doing their own thing. This is a huge miss. You can't expect to have empowered teams if you don't provide them the context. The vision is not meant to be done on a team basis. It's meant to be done on the organization basis. So the vision is our North Star. I would also say, well, first of all, just to be clear, for software, it's typically 2 to 5 years out. For hardware, it's typically 5 to 10 years out. But this is actually your single best recruiting tool. This is one of the reasons I strongly encourage teams to get a great product vision. These are not meant to be, you can't really validate a vision. We can validate our product work, but the vision is honestly, be honest, it's a leap of faith. You are asking people to take a leap of faith. If you knew exactly how to do it, it wouldn't be a 5-year vision. It would probably be the next year worth of, features in a roadmap. This is, so this needs to persuade. This is our best tool for hiring great product design and engineers, is a compelling product vision. Then, of course, we need to make sure we don't make that mistake of trying to please everybody with in a given product release. And the product strategy is our primary tool to describe that path from where we are now to the vision, 5 years out. So that's there's a lot of different ways to do strategy, and again, it's beyond this too. You can Google any of these topics. I've written about all these things, but the strategy is our primary way to make sure that we are breaking this down into achievable, significant milestones. It's usually a sequence of product market fits, but that's just one way of doing it. The third part of this vision strategy principles, troika, is the principles. These are referring to the nature of the products you're trying to create. These are kind of different because these are talking about beliefs that the organization has that will help us make hard trade-offs when we're faced with dilemmas like the needs of Uber riders versus Uber drivers. They will not always be compatible. Sometimes we're going to have to make trade-offs, and we need to know what the dynamics of that marketplace are. The fourth is priorities. Look, no company can do everything it wants to do. Another classic example, when the leaders are not doing their job, they're not being clear on the priorities, you basically have every team kind of assuming what the priorities really are. And so no surprise you don't make the progress you need. Now, if you are using OKRs or some other objective-based system, that's what it's for. We need to know, when we do OKRs in a product organization, despite how a lot of people, that's a whole other topic. Everybody knows that there's a lot of grief associated with OKRs. Most of it unnecessary, but it's still there and it's frustrating. Let me just say, in a product organization to do OKRs meaningfully, not just lip service, but meaningfully, we need it at 2 levels, the organizational level and at the team level. And this is the organizational level. The leaders, you need to decide for this year what's important for the organization. So that's the priorities there. And the final one is evangelism. And the truth is, this is not a major one if you're a startup, except you will spend a lot of time with investors and partners. But as you get into a larger company, growth stage, and especially enterprise size, this becomes probably your most time-consuming responsibility. And I warn people, you just can't let up. You just can't let up. You have to tell the story. In fact, if you want teams of missionaries, this is how you get them. You have to convert them. You have to preach to them. So that's the role of evangelism. These are the 5 big responsibilities, I would argue, of every head of product. And if you're not doing this, you can hopefully start to see already that how could your teams have the context they need to make good decisions if they're going to be able to be empowered to make decisions. There's no context. So they're going to have to either escalate things up to you or to the CEO or call, design by committee meetings where all the stakeholders come together. None of that is what we want to do. All right. I actually want to make this real too. So I put in here some real people that are great examples of what I mean. I don't want you to think that this is, in fact, one of my underlying points here, and you'll see at the end, is great teams really are comprised of very ordinary people. they're not, that whole myth that you need to find these 10Xers or rock stars is really untrue, and I think even damaging. I'll come back to that. But this is one of my favorite startup CEOs, Stacy Santee. I have had a front row seat as an advisor, watched her. She was practicing vet in a little mountain town and very frustrated with the technology. And actually for several years just kept bringing vendors in to see what they had. And her view, her mission really is to take care of animals. And she felt like it is really hard for a vet to do that. The technology, especially between vets and the pet owners, is so broken or non-existent in most cases. And anyway, finally she just gave up. She said, look, I'm going to start a company and do this because this is a real hole, and she was frustrated. She didn't do it to make $1 billion or anything like that. She did it for the animals, actually. And Stacy, so I watched her. First, she had to learn product. She had to learn product because she had to figure out this product, which she did. Then I saw her because now she was also managing a team of engineers. She had to learn engineering management. Then she had to learn marketing. Then she had to learn sales. Then she had to learn biz dev. Then she had to learn fundraising. And all the while, this company, in fact, it came out of nowhere and has completely disrupted the space. They have thousands of happy vets and I don't know how many pet owners that use their stuff. It has completely changed that industry. I would argue any good product person, and this applies from CEO to product manager, any good product person, they really need to be humble. They need to know what they don't know. They also need to know what they can't know. And this is, I think, one of her best advantages. She knew nothing about any of this stuff, but she knew that she didn't know that. Unlike a lot of people, right, where their arrogance is sort of obscuring this. She knew she didn't know. There's not an arrogant bone in her body. She realized, and somebody, reasonably smart person, committed to a passionate vision to help, in this case, a very persuasive vision about helping pets around the country initially. And I watched her just learn everything, just one after the other, just learn. And that's what we're looking for. And so it's not an accident, in my view, that her company has grown so quickly and has such passionate customers. All right, so let's talk about management now, the role of management. I love this Steve Jobs quote because I think so many people misunderstand his legacy. They really do think he was this product person that was describing, the requirements, and it's so not true. And I think this is a much better characteristic. And again, this is what we're talking about. You don't hire smart people and give them roadmaps. You hire smart people and let them figure out what to do. And as an aside, there's the first, I think ever, first real book on how discovery is done at Apple from the inside just came out recently. It's by a guy named Ken Kacinda. It's called Creative Selection. It's kind of his word play on natural selection. So if you take natural selection and inject design into it, you kind of get this rapidly evolving series of prototypes. But he actually was the tech lead on the iPhone. So remember, this is, 11 years old now? And it was a 3.5-year effort. So he's a tech lead on the original iPhone, responsible for probably the riskiest part of this whole device, which, by the way, is why Apple's a $1 trillion company, right? Is this. He was responsible for coming up with a viable touchscreen keyboard, which now we all take it for granted because the whole world basically enters stuff on a touchscreen device. But back then, nobody had done that. And but they identified early on that was the single biggest risk, and he was the tech lead on the team that figured that out. And he kind of journals over 300 pages how they discovered this solution. So I would strongly encourage you to read it. But yeah, this is what we're looking for. Now let's talk about the role of management here. There are 3 big responsibilities. Now, Again, I think I'm talking about most of you in the room. I think all of you are by definition a head of product, so you would be in the leader category, and I'm assuming most of you actually manage product managers. Many of you probably manage designers too. So I'm talking to you. I'm not talking here about product managers or product marketing managers. I am especially, though, talking about those of you who are first-level managers of product managers, designers, or engineers, because that's really where this happens. And I would also say this is the key right here to successfully going to empowered teams. It's almost impossible, in my experience, if the managers are not doing what they need to do. So let's talk about that. First of all, staffing. Obvious, really, but as you'll see, I think there's a lot of problems stem right here. But we are, the managers of product management, you're responsible for recruiting, right? Sourcing, recruiting, closing, obviously interviewing. You know, HR is there to help, don't get me wrong, but if you think HR will do this, you're wrong. HR can't do this. This is on the hiring managers. This is why, of course, we need certain managers recruit product managers, other ones recruit designers, and other ones recruit engineers, because there's real difference there. The competence is different we're looking for. But this is your first responsibility, bringing in competent people. And I'll talk about in a minute where that goes wrong so often. The second one is what I really wanted to highlight, though, because if I had to put my finger on one thing, it would be this, coaching. Because I would argue to all of you in a room that are heads of product that really, of all your responsibilities, the biggest one is to develop a great team of product managers. If you fail on that, you know, everything else fails. So this is the biggest responsibility. You know, I realized I sort of grew up in the industry in a bubble. So like Haas said, I actually started at HP Labs. The first 10 years of my career was in engineering and then engineering management. And every single day of those 10 years, I had at least one manager whose explicit job was to get me competent and to the next level. And I thought everybody had that. And I remember when I left, you know, and I kind of went out into the more real world outside of the HP lab sort of cocoon, and I found that, in fact, today I would say it's the other extreme. Most of the time I meet people, and I'm often introduced to product managers, and I'm often shocked at how little they know about product. They are so far from competent. And I'm like, who's responsible for teaching you this stuff? And nobody. Literally nobody. And that's a huge miss. Now, sometimes it's because the manager literally doesn't know what good is. Other times they're too busy. They don't realize that this is their biggest responsibility. But this is a huge hole. And honestly, one of the most actionable things you can do is invest in coaching your people. I mean, at the bare minimum, this is a one-on-one with each of your direct reports every single week and helping to fill their gaps. We could talk a lot more about that. This is something I plan to talk a lot more about, good coaching techniques, but it is critical role for the managers of product design and engineering. And finally, if you're going to empower teams, this is why OKRs are so popular, really, because the promise of OKRs is to move away from giving features to build, solutions to the team, to give them problems to solve. So I mentioned you need to have priorities, the objectives at the high level, the organizational level, but we also need, each team needs their relevant set of objectives. And it's on the managers to actually decide like what the buyer team should be working on, what the seller team should be working on. I can't tell you how many companies I meet and they tell me they're using OKRs and they describe how the process works. It's like, oh yeah, every quarter every team proposes their OKRs. It's like, what? You know, it's chaos. And the chances of those things actually coming out to meeting the organization's objectives are pretty close to zero. So The managers, the way it's supposed to work, I won't take much time, but I want to be clear. The managers state the objectives that the company needs that team to focus on, and the team proposes the key results that they think they can achieve. And then there's a back and forth because sometimes all the teams, are making too much progress on one objective and not on another, so there might be some back and forth. But that's how it's supposed to work. It is not the teams just pick whatever they think is, cool to work on. All right. There's a trade-off with empowered teams. It's not empowered to go do anything. It is empowered to figure out the best way to solve the problems we're asked to solve. Okay, so those are the three big responsibilities of the people managers. It's probably worth pointing out, this I think has sadly got worse over the last several years. The capabilities of the people managers have gone down. I actually attribute that partly, in significant part really, to the move to Agile, which I want to be clear, I've been advocating teams move to Agile for 15 years. So and I'm not suggesting you not move to Agile, but there was a lot of people misunderstood the move to Agile. They thought, because Agile basically tries to get managers to back off. It's like literally back off. How many of you have heard engineering managers come to you and say, what am I supposed to do now that we've moved to Agile and these teams are kind of self-organizing on how they solve problems? Well, Agile doesn't need less managers, it needs better managers. That's the thing, it really does require, it's actually easier to be an old-style command and control manager than it is to actually be a manager of a competent, empowered team. So it needs better managers, not less. So the role of management has got to get, I think, a lot of attention again. And I'm saying that I'm going to focus a lot of my time on that. As another great example, some of you may know Christian. He's one of my absolute favorite heads of product. I first met him about a decade ago. He was the head of product at a company called Snag-a-Job in Richmond, Virginia. They're a big jobs marketplace, and I was so impressed. I met him because I was very impressed with the people that he had been coaching and developing. And then we became friends. I've now seen him as head of product at 3 different companies. And in fact, he should be in this room, honestly, but I can tell you literally this week and next week he's doing another one of his 2-week boot camps for this year's batch of new product people. And just to be clear, that is what we want our heads of product to do. That's what makes him so good at his job. It is a fantastic place for a product manager to work because they'll get coached in how to really get to competence, how to be a strong product manager. I did ask him, he's unusually good at developing people, and I wanted to understand more about that. So over dinners years ago, he explained to me that he's actually Nigerian. He grew up in Nigeria, and he actually went to this school funded by the UN where they had children, he said, starting at age 12 from all over Africa, every socioeconomic group from across Africa. He said 80 different languages spoken there, and the first thing you learn is how to get along with different people. And he really I think he developed a lot of those skills. Some of this is just his desire to develop people into greatness. So that's what we're looking for in our managers. He's also a great head of leader. All right, so let's talk about, because I started this by saying, look, the leaders are not trusting the teams. And I just spent a few minutes describing the context the leaders have to provide, but we got to tackle this issue of trust. And this is part that can be painful, but the truth is, empowered teams are predicated on team members, product managers, designers, and engineers that are competent with the necessary character. And I need to talk about both of those because it really is huge. So you guys know Stephen Covey was the 7 Habits is Highly Effective People kind of thought leader in that area. I think his definition of trust is the most relevant in my view. We really are looking for these two things, competence and character. Now, I'll talk about character next, but I want to start with competence, because this is really where so many teams fail. I've been very frustrated. I think this is another unintentional casualty of the move to Agile. But we have, I would say, there's a higher percentage of incompetent product managers today than ever before, which I hate saying that. It's just true, it's just reality. And I think the main reason for that is not because people are smart or anything like that. It's because now by far the most common training is Scrum product owner class. And they think that makes them a product manager, and it doesn't. So we have a lot of people that are really not able to do their job. Now, I think they are capable if they were trained, if they were developed, and that's why I get to the role of management again. But the first responsibility, of the people managers when they're staffing is to hire competent people. And again, that's why we usually have different people recruiting. But where does that go wrong? Well, first of all, a lot of heads of product have never actually seen good product before, which is not really their fault, right? I'll sit down with them and like, what are you doing? And why are you doing it this? And they literally, in their career, they've been doing it maybe 10 years, have never actually seen good. It's like, man, that's a huge disadvantage. If you haven't seen good, how do you know what to even look for? That's frustrating. And by the way, this is, I think, even worse for small companies in design, because usually the people hiring those first designers aren't designers. So, the chances of them, you've all heard that old trite saying, A's hire A's and B's hire C's. That's kind of what goes on. These people don't know what to look for, so they bring in people that are not competent. Now, I want to be honest, some of the greatest things I feel so good about in my career are times I bet on somebody's potential. I didn't believe they had competence. It was pretty obvious they didn't have competence, but they had potential. And I'm like, I'm going to bet on that potential. There is nothing wrong. I think it's awesome of you to hire for potential, but only, and this is really critical, if and only if the hiring manager agrees to coach them to competence. And if they can't do that, they got to find them another job. So that's a big commitment. I know that's a lot of where my time went as the head of product, in coaching people to competence. But that's fine. But if you don't have the time or the ability to coach them to competence, then you have to hire for competence. And if you don't know what that looks like, you need to get somebody to help you with that. Maybe an advisor or maybe somebody from another team that is competent. So we can put together an interview team that can ensure competence. But this is a common problem. We just make this bad problem worse. Another thing that goes wrong is that when you get these managers that aren't sure what good looks like, they feel like, oh man, we have to hire a rock star. We hear that so many different ways. A 10Xer, you've heard that phrase, or gotta hire a rock star. So they start, we're gonna get a Google person, or and then, after a few weeks of trying and failing, they come, I can't get any of them. They don't wanna work here, or we can't pay them enough, or, we can't retain them. They have all these excuses. And so, unfortunately, a lot of times then they find somebody that does have really good skills, but they come with some real baggage, which I'll talk about next. And they don't realize that they're actually causing more problems for the team than good. So it's not about hiring rock stars, it's about hiring competence. The good news, there's a lot more people that are competent than are rock stars. That's going to lead to my next point, which is we need to talk about character. For those that don't know, this is the New Zealand All Blacks. What you probably don't know is in the world of sports, they are the single most successful sports franchise across all sports, all countries, all teams, all time, at least in the last 100 years. 77% win percentage, just remarkable. This team dominates. I mean, and it's, of course, the national treasure. But they learned a long time ago that they get these amazingly skilled physical specimens. They're famous for doing the haka. They don't always stand like that, but that's what they have this real culture, and they're famous for getting these amazing people that come to them. And they learned something the hard way. They learned that if the person has amazing skills, but they're an asshole, then you don't hire them. Now, this is a really important point. And I don't know a single company that actually has that in their HR guidelines, right? I don't. But I would argue you should. You should all have this explicitly in your guidelines. But it's worse than that. This is where I think so many companies go wrong. Just in recruiting their people. Right here, they're dooming themselves. So what they do, almost every company in their HR guidelines has something in there about ensure cultural fit. You've all heard that phrase, right? So I mean, it sounds so harmless. I've come to the conclusion that is poisonous. It really is poisonous. It's not that it's intentionally poisonous, of course it's not, but what happens is when you actually talk to the interview team, it's like, so what does that mean to you, cultural fit? Who knows? First of all, it is incredibly vague. But then they say, well, this is their thinking. It's like, okay, well, by definition, I'm a cultural fit because I work here, right? So what that means really is we need to find people like me. Yeah, literally like me. So what does that mean? Well, they've probably gone to the same schools. They've had the same degrees. They probably, look a lot like me, sound a lot like me. To me, it's pretty obvious, at least in my view, this is why our industry has such a bad record with diversity, is because of this. It's this trying to hire people like you for this cultural fit. One thing that even kills me more, though, is that not only do they have this idea of cultural fit, but to them that means people that think like them. Think like them. A lot of companies have interview questions that are crafted to see if they think like them. Do they solve problems the way they do? And I'm like, what are you doing? What we want in a team are people that think differently than you. That's what we really want. Why do we need more people that think the same way? The great teams have this diversity of thought too. So, but it's not even about, I'm not even trying to make the point about clean up the diversity problem here. I'm trying to say the even bigger issue is we end up hiring jerks. Yeah, they are like us, but they're jerks. That is not what we want. What we want to do is there's this big pool of candidates out there. Instead of going down to the rock stars and then focusing it down even further to people like you, no, instead of that, you've got that big pool of candidates, just take it down to competence. Make sure you get people who are competent, and then just screen out the few that are assholes. Yeah, it's a much bigger pool. It really is. It's a much bigger pool of much better people. There's a lot of great data at this point. I showed you a bunch of those books. But if you're really into this topic, the company that I think has done the best research on this particular point about what it takes to make great teams is actually Google. They did a project several years of research called Project Aristotle. They shared a lot of it. You can Google the term. And they found that, you'd think that if you had something really hard to do, if you take these rock stars from across the company and you put them together on a team, that they'll do great work. It's just not the case. The best teams are literally ordinary people that are not assholes. Really. They have this trust. They talk a lot in the Aristotle work about because they're not assholes, people feel safe on a team. They feel like they can talk, they can suggest ideas, they're listened to. It's just a normal, healthy team. So that's what we want to do. All right. So let me just make this last point because I want to show you that these ordinary people are awesome. Now, all of these people are I would argue, ordinary people, but they are members of teams that have done extraordinary things. And this is really, I want to sort of show you what I look for. Adi's actually a product manager at a company in Israel called Augury. And I'll also share that I don't know why. I have a theory, but I'm not sure why. But empirically, the consistently best product teams I see in the world are actually Israeli teams. Now, my theory is that unlike the rest of the world, at age 18, all men and women go from high school to serve in the military. And this is not like dig ditches or whatever. This is like they put you on real jobs. The military looks at your high school grades and will decide where they're going to put you. They decided to put Adi as a fighter pilot. So they sent her to flight training, flight school. It was about a year program. She's now a pilot. And then they say, hey, you're actually pretty good on the technology side. We'd like to actually have you work on our flight simulation software for emergency maneuvers. What to happen if things really go wrong in the air. And so she did, and then they said, okay, we need you to train these pilots on this stuff. And her commanding officer explains, look, here's the thing. They come in for training a couple times a year, and just for a couple days. In this short amount of time, you have got to get them to listen to you, because it's literally can save their life. So you have to figure out how to get them to listen to you. They explained, they won't listen to you unless they trust you. So you better do your homework. You need to know what you're talking about. Do your homework so they'll trust you. And by the way, they won't even give you the chance of trusting you until they like you. Sort of the no asshole, competent, then it works. And I just think that this is why she's such a strong product person. This is what we do. All right, on the design side, I mean real product designers here, just to be clear. I'm not talking about just visual design or graphic design. True product designers are worth their weight in gold for product teams. I have known Audrey even longer than I've known Ha. She worked for me back at Netscape. She was very lucky because she got the head of design at Netscape was this guy who came out of Apple who's legendary in the Valley. His name is Hugh Dubberly, and he really coached her into become an awesome designer. But I have watched her countless times solve, this is what designers do. They solve very hard problems with lots of constraints. That's what they do, and they are great. And great designers they figure out a way. They just figure out a way to make it happen. So, yeah, great results. And then let's talk about engineering. Lindsay, Lindsay's a terrific engineer. She, one of the things I look for in engineers, I'd encourage you when you're interviewing engineers for the teams, we need engineers that are fearless. That's a part that isn't talked about enough. If you want a team of missionaries, then you need engineers that are not afraid to go toe-to-toe with your product managers, to go toe-to-toe with the CEO, with you. That's what I'm interviewing for. Lindsay, grew up in a disadvantaged environment. She was also really this nerdy kid that was totally, 89 pounds and 5'9", totally, rail thin and big, thick glasses. But luckily for her, she liked to program. She learned to program, and she went on to study computer science and also drama. And she's now, she specializes in native iOS apps. In fact, she's a highly rated expert on Stack Overflow, if you're into that. And she and so she does that, and she's also continued with her acting too, which is great. But that's what we're looking for in an engineer. So product design, and these are just normal people. None of them are like MIT, Stanford types. These are just good people that have been put in the right environments where they can do pretty awesome things. That's what we're looking for. All right, so I think I'm roughly out of time, yeah. So, but that's all right. I just had one last thing here. Oh, there you are. It says time over, so hopefully we'll. No, but last point here. I promised I'd give you a litmus test on truly empowered teams. Because it's not that hard to know what it is, and then you can decide if your teams. And I really hope, because you really are the right people, but this is what I think you want to strive for. First of all, make sure each of your product teams is staffed with competent people that have the necessary set of skills. Normally that's product design and engineering. Some teams need data analysts, some teams need user research, but whatever you determine the right set of skills is, make sure they're staffed with competent people. And it's on you as the manager or your colleague managers of design, of engineering, to make sure you get them to competence. Otherwise, in truth, you're setting them up to fail. That's what's going on. And there's just no way you can really empower them. The second test, which is really the definitive test for this, stop giving them features to build and projects to build. Start giving them problems to solve. That's really what we mean. That's the real purpose of OKRs, is to give you problems to solve, those are objectives, and business results, which is the third point, to measure the results, is that we're accountable to actual business results, not just shipping features. That's what we mean by a truly empowered team. If you've got these things for your teams, I applaud you, and I would argue you've giving your company the chance you need to succeed going forward. If you don't have this model, then you're probably in that command and control model, and all I can tell you is it just doesn't scale. All right, so it says we've got 3 minutes for some Q&A, but I know there's a break after this too, so I'll be hanging around. But is there any questions? I threw so much at you. Yes? Or I can just repeat the question, it's faster. Great question. The question was, how do you not hire assholes? Unfortunately, assholes are usually clever enough to get through the interview process, right? Yeah. If they're a dumb asshole, then it's like you'll probably spot that in the... So I actually have a great answer to that. There is a terrific book called The No Asshole Rule, written by Stanford MBA professor Bob Sutton. It's a short book. It's awesome. It talks about how to screen them out. And it also talks about, because let's be honest, the real issue is not that hard for them to get through the interview process. The real issue is, are you going to fix it? If you're the manager, are you going to fix it? I will tell you, the biggest regrets I have, and virtually everybody I know who's an experienced people manager, their biggest regret is waiting too long to get rid of the assholes. It's just we all do. We think we can't do it because they have this specialized expertise and we're going to be so hosed if we get rid of them, but it's better in every case. Yes?
So what if you come into a team that exists and can an asshole be coached?
Well, so the question was, you join a team and can you actually coach that asshole and make them better? So this is also a topic of the book. In fact, the book spends a lot of time talking about how to work successfully in a company with assholes. That's not my favorite part of it. That's not why I'm telling you about that book. So the truth is, I know a lot of people that don't realize what a jerk they're being. So a lot of times, if the manager is doing their job, one-on-one coaching, this is absolutely subject. In fact, a lot of the coaching I give for product people, it's not like I'm telling them they're an asshole. It's just that I'm like, let's talk about how you handled that very upset head of sales. Because I think you could have done way better. Because, the way that ended, everybody's unhappy. So we talk about that. So this is the job of the manager. Now, if I feel like the person has no interest in changing their ways, that's when I've learned it's just better to find them get them out of your organization.
Release them back to the wild.
Back to the wild. One last question. Yes.
Hey, when you receive regulatory things that need to be done, which is something we're going through now, how do you maintain a feeling of empowerment for the team? Because they don't have the expertise to know how to, manage this regulatory. It's done from our legal team. And so how do you maintain a feeling of empowerment since they're getting these top-down control type projects?
Okay. So first of all, that's a good question. I wish I did have a little more time, but I can at least say there's two parts to the question about regulation. The first one is, first of all, this is totally normal. Product managers deal with constraints every single day. It would be so much easier if all we had to do was make something that our customers loved. Like Uber. Customers love it, but they're shut down in Hungary. I could not find an Uber, and I learned it's because they're shut down in Hungary. So what's the point of that, right? So we deal with constraints all the time. And I would say the short answer to that is you need a product manager that understands these legal constraints and will come up with solutions to fix that. The other thing I'd say is no matter what, there are always some things, it's often by a lot of teams referred to as keep the lights on work, right? There's always stuff we have to do. It's not all the fun new stuff, redesigns and new apps and things. There's always some stuff like that. And that's just part of tech. Yeah, so GDPR. You just had to do it, right? We just had to do it, right? You're going to waste a lot of time debating it. On that fun note, all right. Anyway, it was great to be with you guys. I hope this was useful. Thanks very much.